welcome to the A4 group from Top Gun, the movie, and the actual thing. You guys were the real deal at Top Gun, and we're going to talk about the overland scenes because I think that was pretty much how the A4 was done. Rat, sir, you were heavily involved in that. Tell us about just coordinating how the A4 stuff came about.
First of all, thanks for having us all, and these guys look great after 40 years. I can only imagine how these stories are going to be twisted. So hang in there with us. But at the inception, the decision by Paramount was to make the F-5s the adversary airplane for this movie, and the A-4s they intended to be the school's aircraft. So the A-4 guys, the guys that flew the A-4 and generally flew it over land, were there to represent Top Gun instructors and the school. If you go all the way back to that decision, the F-5s, we took 4 of them, set them aside. Paramount painted them black with a red star on the tail, and if you can imagine, because they didn't want to pay the money to restore the camouflage paint schemes, they actually painted them with black rubberized paint that you could pinch and pull away and it would snap back. And so we spent the first several weeks as we flew those aircraft with flames down the side of camouflage because the rubber paint kept peeling off. In the case of the A4s, we kept them in their camouflage schemes, and they were terrific over land. I mean, they're so maneuverable when we took them up into the high desert, especially up in Fallon. I think the filming was great with those aircraft.
Wow. Secks, you said you were involved in the filming. But you're an F5 guy. What kind of overland filming did you do? And was there any F5 stuff filmed over land?
Yeah, there was a lot of F5 stuff filmed over land. We got up there, if you remember correctly, Paramount wanted us to fly at 250 knots. And that was okay down in Miramar, but that didn't work very well up at Fallon at 8,000 feet elevation. And Raph, you remember, we went out there the first day, and when we were doing the filming, and we asked them how they were going to talk to us, and he showed us these little walkie-talkies that they had, which obviously not compatible with our radios. And so we went down and got some military radios, showed them how to use them, and give them a signal mirror to go out to the desert. And then we went out to the first day. I know we had 4 F5s. I'm not sure. I know Rat was one of them, and me, and I'm not sure who the other 2 Top Gun instructors were. And we get out there, because remember, they told us, we want you to start doing your maneuvers at about 1,000 to 1,500 feet out. And we get out there, and first we can't find them, and couldn't use the signal mirrors, and they couldn't talk to us on the radio. And so Rat went down and did a kind of low level up down the ridge lines until he finally located them. And then we came out and just did the maneuvers we'd briefed and went back and landed, and they got 0 film. And we told them earlier that we were not going to cancel a Top Gun class. They had to get this filming done in between our classes. And so Rat made the executive decision to send Top Gun instructors out to the site to do the filming. If you see, one of the pictures I sent you, Mover, was the camera system that they'd rented from Vandenberg Air Force Base. And the 2 people who knew how to work the radios was me and Jambo. He was an LSO and I was a Marine. And so we got volunteered to go out to the desert site to translate everything into pilot lingo, make sure the radios worked, and get the filming done. So that's how that started out. And so we went out there that afternoon to film. And Rat, you were in an A4, I believe, at that time. We were doing some of those shots, and it was pretty comical. I asked Tony Scott, how you getting us out there? And he said, we're going to fly in helicopters. And I asked him, is these military helicopters? And he said, no, these are civilian helicopters. And I told him, you don't understand. I don't like flying military helicopters, and Paramount don't have enough money to put me in a civilian helicopter. I said, give me something to drive and give me some directions, and I'll drive out there. Jambo, on the other hand, got into helicopters to fly out. And so when he got out there, they'd already heel lifted him into Paramount cameramen with tripod cameras up to the top of the mountain. The other camera system was down at the base of the mountain. And I'll have to let Jim will tell you that story, how he got back, because the big helicopter was too big to sit on top of the mountain. So they had a little four-seater that he'd lift them up to the top of the mountain. But when it got time to bring them back down after he got the filming done, the helicopter broke. And apparently, according to Jambo, the pilot jumped out the helicopter because they had a tail rotor problem, and him and the two cameramen were still in the helicopter until the pilot kind of scrambled back down and turned the engine off. So they had to walk down to get the big helicopter to fly them back. But that's how it started. And the scariest thing I saw during the whole movie was watching the airplanes and some of the F-5s trying to do rolls. And, they were pretty low to the ground to start with, and they were mushing out. And I said, God, man, that's too slow. And so we get back and said, okay, 250 is too slow up here. So we sped the minimum speed to 300 knots, and that obviously started causing us a lot of paint to start stripping off the airplanes, but it was just a safety factor. But that's how I got involved with some of the A-4 stuff. I was kind of on the ground doing a lot of filming initially.
I'm going to go to Tex. You did a lot of low-level flying in mountainous terrain, correct? Like, were you part of the jinx, if you will, the aileron rolls at low altitude?
Yeah, that's my recollection, and it could be that others did it as well. And Rat, you can back me up on this. It seems to me like it was the first day that we were filming at the plateau out there, and essentially we had an F-14 and me and the A-4, and the routine was for me to fly around, essentially based on Rat's calls and left, right, wherever. And I didn't have a particularly good, exact location of where the filming site was, but he vectored us around. And the idea was for the F-14, the F-14 in this case, to stay within 1,000 feet of the A-4, so they could be inside the field of view of the camera. And so we're flying around probably 380 or so, something like that. It's a pretty reasonable and comfortable speed. And it's in the afternoon, and we're flying from east to west, kind of up this gorge, and then at the end of the plateau or the mesa, as far as I remember, it drops off into the desert. I think it's one of the scenes in the movie, but not with the A-4. So Rat's calling our turns, and we're making the turns. He and the F-14 is following me 1,000 feet, 380, and I'm trying to not outturn the F-14. Roll rate's pretty poor on the F-14 and extremely high on the A-4. So we went back and forth a few times and made a couple of runs. And as we're doing it, the sun is getting lower in the west. And it's an east face that we're working up. And the shadows started rising up the side of the mountain that we're kind of flying up to. We've all been there. We can remember this. Very bright above the shadow, very dark below the shadow, nice clear day. And so Rat suggested that maybe the A-4 should take a few runs behind the F-14. So, okay, we can do that. And so we set back up, and the F-14, I can't remember who was flying the F-14 at that point. And Rat's calling his turns back and forth. And I can't decide if I want to stay in lead or go to lag behind the F-14. So I decided to go to lag. And as he's making these turns, I would kind of delay and then roll behind him into lag. Well, 380 and the F-14 is probably pulling 3 or 4 Gs. I soon discovered the strength of wingtip vortices out there. As I hit them, the A-4 would just very quickly snap in a roll and nose down into the shadows. Got my attention right away, knocked it off, pulled up where I could see better. And we tried it one more time, and it happened again. I said, we can either put me back in front or we could go home, but I'm not staying by the F-14 anymore.
Did that make the movie? Was any of that used?
So. No,
I don't think the snap rolls did. But to Tex's point here, a little bit of context in this. Tony Scott, the director, was a visualist, heavily into low light kind of conditions. So virtually all the flying that we did was either really early in the morning or later in the evening. And later in the evening was actually his, I think his favorite, and it tended to work out. So we flew in not optimum lighting conditions quite often, just to satisfy the visual needs that he had. And then to the point that Secks made in text also, in order to stay inside the frame of a camera, which we were not accustomed to doing, you had to fly generally slower, lower, and closer in all things. So you'd take an F-14 and either the F-5 or the A-4 and slow them down, and then try to maneuver them the way that the director wanted them maneuvered, and it's going to be a challenge. And so the testament to these guys is there's some pretty dynamic flying in that movie, and often it was under less than optimum conditions because of the way they set it up, and his needs to have it be in lighting conditions that maybe weren't ideal.
Who set up the hit the brakes, fly right by scene? Who was the A4 guy in that one?
Yeah, it was me, and it was
cool.
the last day that we were in Fallon. It was never part of the discussion up to that point in the storyboards that Tony Scott would develop, and then we would translate into a flying scene. We kind of ran out of storyboards. I don't know how many of you remember the end of the flying up in Fallon segment, but we had a commitment on the East Coast that some of the Top Gun pilots took off to meet, and the rest of the airplanes were being kind of sortied home to Miramar. And in the end, there were two F-14s, Benoit Snyder and Bozo Abel were the two F-14 pilots, and I was left with an A-4. And the director turned to us and said, "Well, that's all I've got in my repertoire. Do you guys have anything else to show me?" So we said yes. And one of the things that we did was set up a pitch pulse for the F-14, which is for the altitude and airspeed it was flying. It's just an instantaneous onset of G. And I was in the A-4 behind him. The first time we did it with the F-14 that had cameras on it, which we were a little sensitive about because we didn't want to damage the cameras. As it turns out, when we executed the pitch pulse in the F-14, a panel came off the side of the airplane, went whizzing by my head in the A-4 and was lost in the desert. You don't need to put this segment into this.
But it's awesome.
We sent that airplane back to the airfield, and we brought the other F-14 out. But when Tony Scott saw the pitch pulse, he got excited because it was just something unique. And in the A-4, I purposefully didn't stay with the F-14. I overshot. So he saw that as a scene that he could then use in the movie. And then, as you know, it turned into Maverick's premier move.
If you have an old guy and you've got a DVD player and you're playing the movie, if you slow that scene down, you actually can see the spoiler panel coming off the airplane and going by Rat's head. Before he had, I believe, Ratty had a hydraulic failure because of that and had to take it back into Fallon. But that was kind of humorous at the time. But that was part of that. I mean, Rat, I'll tell you, Mover is downplaying his role in how all the filming really turned out in terms of the flying scenes. I can remember when Boa and Willie and I were at one of the hotels in town having beer and pizza when these guys are looking at the dailies that were shot that day. And I think Jerry Bruckheimer was in town, and part of what he was seeing wasn't really meeting his expectations or something like that. But at any rate, fairly quickly after that, Rat was the guy the rest of the way that would take input from Tony and then orchestrate in his mind how we could go out and execute on that. Brief us up really well in the morning or the afternoon, and we'd go out and just follow his direction time and time again to really get these shots. And without that interface that Rat provided, I have little doubt that the flying scenes that everybody sees would have been anywhere near what they turned out to be. So there's not that many Bob Willards in the world, and he sort of proved it through that whole episode there.
Wow. So did you overhear a lot of, the production talk with Jerry Bruckheimer and Tony Scott in your time while they were filming?
No, I had that one episode where it was kind of a one-way conversation, as I recall. But at any rate, after that, at least for the time that I was there, the whole way we went about filming things changed. And I think that's what led to some of the really good shots that came out.
And Oregon says you knocked Tony Scott off his chair.
That's according to Rat. I mean, there was one scene that we did, the three of us. It was Boa, Tex, and I, and we were out there doing several things. But one of us, Rat just wanted us to fly right at the tabletop that these guys were at, and just fly over the mountain and do some stuff like that. And I was in the lead of a 3-ship, 1 up and 2 back, and we come at the mountain. We're pretty low, and I would just do a basic ridgeline cross. And I am assuming is where I was low enough to where I probably lower than I should have been. But at any rate, what I remember about that is I'm upside down. Tex, I don't know if you remember this, and I look forward and I can see power lines down in the valley that we're coming into. And I saw those and went, oh my goodness. And it was, thank goodness for the A-4. I just ripped it up right and made the call to you and Mike about the power line back there. Every time I see that scene in the movie, I think about that and how, we didn't know it was there and pulled out. It turned out to be a non-event, but different day, you never know. It could have been. So
I'm glad we didn't do this 35 years ago. It's a good thing, man.
Wow.
And we went and got that panel too, Rad, just to so you'd.
I actually went down and looking for it. If you can imagine what an idiot I was. Thought I could find it on the desert floor and never did. Hey, mover to the point that they're making about the mountaintop. There were several different areas up in Fallon that the director actually located and wanted us to shoot, to film at. And probably the best single location is the location that Circus was talking about. So we found this unique setting, the rocks that if you remember some of the scenes in the movie that the F-14s maneuver through, and the tabletop that they're describing where the filmmakers set up, were right at a cliff edge that went down about 4,000 feet into a valley. So we could do some pretty spectacular flying at eye level across, up and down, and obviously over the top of them. And I was operating the radios on one occasion when the description of this scene occurred. So as the A-4s came over and rolled over the top of it, going fast enough and low enough, they had beach chairs up there that these guys were sitting in, other than the cameramen on 35 millimeter tripod cameras, and all the beach chairs that weren't occupied got sucked up in the air and came crashing back down, and several of the cameramen tried to stay with the airplane, fell over backwards. I mean, it was a chaotic little scene, but done really well by the Top Gun airplanes.
Wow. How do you think the movie changed naval aviation from the time were you worried when it first came out that this was going to be, something awesome, or were you like, man, I hope this didn't suck, when you finish filming?
So they took us all to a cast and crew screening up in Paramount before they actually premiered the movie, to give ourselves and our wives an opportunity to see it. So we all caravanned up to Paramount Studios, and they set us up in their big theater, Dolby sound around, which was state of the art at the time. And they showed us the Top Gun movie, and they had a lot of the crews that had worked the movie, and producers and director, and everybody were there. And I think our wives were all entertained by the movie. I think we were all grumbling about the editing that had gone on. We thought we had shot enough aerial footage, 280,000 feet, I think, at the end of the day,
Wow.
to give the editors plenty to work with. And some of the scenes, I think we were disappointed that they weren't as realistic as they should have been. And so I walked out of the theater, looked at Tony Scott, and he was like, well, and I said, I don't know. I think the jury's still out on this. And I think that was more, our being just critical of, does this really look like flying looks? And we were reminded more than one time that they weren't filming a documentary and we weren't the intended audience. That at the end of the day, it was about the public and it was about entertainment. So,
were you worried? I mean, since you had a big part in setting this up, were you worried about kind of what happened with Final Countdown? Was that around the same time frame? Because if I remember right, Final Countdown had some issues with production and getting stuff not while in government time and all that stuff. Was there a big concern about more of the Final Countdown stuff spilling over?
So really good question. Final Countdown had taken place some years before the Top Gun movie was proposed, and it was on our minds because of the the fallout that occurred with the filming of that movie. And when they put me in charge, I was in charge of the aerial piece of it, but I was also keeping the books and all of the dollars accounting. So I was, literally all the yellow sheets that these guys would fill out after their flights, and we were prorating pilot salaries and things like that. A couple of years after the movie was made, GAO, General Accounting Office, came down and audited those books, and I had to produce all the records from the movie. So, so the answer is yes. I mean, we knew that a previous attempt at this by the Navy had gone badly, and so we were pretty careful about the way we went about our execution.
Hope you guys enjoyed part one of the A-4 group. Stay tuned for part two, where they talk more about some of the filming and also how Top Gun itself changed over the years. So hope you guys enjoyed these interviews. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.